In a secluded cabin lost to the Montana snow, a desperate emergency surgery was underway. Amy Reed, the former combat medic turned veterinarian, watched the monitor flatline as her patient, Ethan Thorne, a fugitive special operative, succumbed to his wounds. Clinically, he was gone. But then, an extraordinary primal event defied medical science. Kestrel, the gray and white German shepherd who had been fighting for his own life, forced his way off the operating floor and unleashed a guttural sound of command at his master. Was it an instinctive cry, or was the bond between man and dog powerful enough to conquer death itself? The answer lay with the encrypted ledger. Ethan risked his life for a conspiracy now threatening the world. You won't believe how this story unfolds. Support our channel and subscribe for more true tales of courage and loyalty. The wind was a hungry, ceaseless thing in the Bitterroot Mountains of western Montana, and by late November, it carried only one promised snow. Not the gentle drifting flakes of a holiday card, but wet, heavy pellets driven sideways with malicious intent. They hammered against the corrugated metal siding of Hope's Crossing Veterinarian Wildlife Clinic, blurring the meager light spilling from the office windows. Amelia, Amy Reed, twisted the deadbolt on the rear service door, the cold metal biting through the fabric of her surgical gloves. Inside the clinic, the air smelled of iodine pine disinfectant and the faint comforting musk of rescued animals, a world she had meticulously built to be clean-ordered and contained. Outside, the world was chaos and cold. Amy, 35, carried the quiet resilience of a woman who had seen the worst of both human and animal suffering and chosen to heal anyway. Her hands, steady enough to suture the smallest tear in a songbird's wing, held the memory of far rougher work. Before this clinic, before the isolated peace of the mountains, there had been dust heat and the sudden brutal shock of trauma as an Army combat medic. She had sworn when she returned to the States that her days of triage and desperation were over. This clinic was her sanctuary, her quiet penance. Tonight, she had spent an extra 2 hours stabilizing a massive bull elk that had broken its leg trying to leap a fence near the highway. The exhausting work had left her both physically drained and mentally sharp. Pulling her heavy insulated coat tighter, she stepped out onto the narrow loading dock, intending only to toss a bag of refuse into the commercial dumpster before heading to her small apartment above the facility. The air was instantly frigid, biting at her exposed cheeks. The only illumination came from a single weak utility lamp that cast a flickering yellow glow over the snow-covered gravel alley. It was not the wind that stopped her, nor the sound of the elk shifting inside the recovery ward. It was a noise that did not belong. A low, controlled grunt of pain instantly stifled, followed by the wet, shallow panting of a large animal. Amy froze her veterinary instincts, instantly overruling her self-preservation. A bear. A coyote caught in something. She set the trash bag down silently and moved toward the shadows near the overflowing dumpster where the snow piled highest, undisturbed by the wind. What she saw was not a wild animal, but 2 living beings huddled together. Lying prone against a stack of discarded wooden pallets was a man. He was tall, even hunched over his frame, bulky beneath layers of dark utilitarian clothing. He appeared to be holding himself together, fighting the urge to move or groan. A quickly spreading crimson stain, dark against the black fabric of his left shoulder, told Amy the grunt she had heard was justified. Cradled tightly beneath his right arm, pressed close to his body for warmth and protection, was a German shepherd. The dog was magnificent, a creature of muscular grace, but its coat was a striking, unusual mix of steel gray and stark white. The animal's head rested on the man's chest, its eyes partially closed, but Amy could see the shallow, rapid rise and fall of its flank. A dark, ugly tear marred its left rear leg where fur was matted stiff with congealing blood. Oh my heavens, Amy breathed the sound instantly snatched by the wind. She took a deliberate step forward, hands raised in the universal gesture of non-threat speaking in the low, calming tone she reserved for frightened patients. I'm a doctor. I'm here to help. I'm not going to hurt either of you. At the sound of her voice, the dog's golden eyes snapped open. They were lucid, intelligent, and filled with a fierce, possessive loyalty. A low, continuous growl, deep and vibrating, started in the dog's chest, a sound like gravel rolling over stone aimed entirely at Amy. The man stirred his head, lifting slightly. He was rugged with dark hair clinging damply to a wide forehead and a jawline that suggested a strong will currently set against intense pain. His eyes dark and piercing even through the haze of shock locked onto hers. This was Ethan Thorne, though Amy of course did not know his name yet. She only saw the raw intensity of a man carrying a burden too heavy to bear. "Don't move." Ethan rasped, his voice rough and low, a sound honed by years of commanding in the field. He did not let go of the dog. "Drop the bag. Stay back." Amy slowly let her hands fall but did not back down. "I need to look at your dog's leg and your shoulder. You've lost a lot of blood. You need a hospital." As if the word hospital were a trigger. Ethan's grip on the German Shepherd tightened infinitesimally. The dog, sensing the shift in its handler's tension, whined softly, but maintained the warning growl aimed at Amy. "No hospitals," Ethan said, his voice gaining a terrifying edge of iron. "No police. You call anyone and we are both dead, doctor." "You too." Amy frowned. She wasn't dealing with a simple hunting accident. This was calculated. The gear, the controlled pain, the absolute refusal of medical authority. It screamed of military training and something far more dangerous than a stray bullet. "I am Amelia Reed. I'm a licensed doctor of veterinary medicine. I have full medical supplies inside. I can patch both of you up," she countered, focusing on the facts. "But you need serious intervention. If I don't call a trauma team, you will bleed out, and your dog, that wound is deep." Ethan looked at Kestrel, his dark eyes softening momentarily with an overwhelming wave of regret and fierce devotion. Then, his gaze returned to Amy, sharp and unrelenting. "Listen to me," he demanded, his words clipped, each syllable costing him a visible effort. "I have proof of treason, a leak involving military biotech. The people who did this are not local. They were not looking for money. They were looking for me and for this." He subtly patted the heavy sodden pack beneath his head. "They will finish the job. If you call, the whole system will be compromised and they will come here and eliminate any witnesses. You are safer if you do this quietly." He was giving her the truth, or at least a truth he desperately needed her to believe. Amy, the former combat medic, recognized the haunted look in his eyes, the look of a man who knew the odds and still refused to quit, not for himself, but for the mission. It was the same fierce, stubborn light she had seen in the eyes of soldiers who carried burdens too large for any official report. She had vowed to leave that world behind. She had sought the quiet, isolated perfection of healing animals, far from the brutality of human conflict. But here, lying in the frozen alley, was a man who needed her specific, dangerous skill set. More importantly, she saw the dog. The gray and white German Shepherd, even in agony, was focused entirely on protecting his handler. Amy looked at Kestrel's shivering body and the man's grim determination. This wasn't just a random act of charity. This was a test, a return to the moral frontier she thought she had crossed for good. "I can't save the world," she thought, her internal voice cold and clear. "But I can save these two. I can heal." The memory of her time in the service, the sudden terrible finality of loss she had witnessed, settled over her. She couldn't save the ones who were already gone, but she would not turn her back on the two bleeding souls right here, right now. She had sworn off that life, but the oath to heal, to help the suffering, was still an active part of her identity. She made her choice. Amy straightened her posture, the fear draining away, replaced by the calm, decisive focus of a professional taking command of a crisis. "Fine," she stated, her voice steady against the wind's howl. "No calls. But you are moving now. I need to get you onto a gurney and inside my surgical room. It's sterile. It's warm. Your dog needs to be stabilized immediately." Ethan hesitated, searching her eyes. He seemed to find the necessary conviction there. the rigid tension in his body eased by the barest fraction. The dog first, he insisted the command implicit even in his weakened state. Kestrel. His name is Kestrel. I understand, Ethan, Amy said, using his name intuitively. But you are too heavy for me to move alone without further injury to your shoulder. You have to help me just enough. She hurried back toward the service door, pulling out the heavy-duty wheeled gurney she used for large animals, horses or large livestock. The metal wheels ground against the snow-covered gravel. Kestrel, good boy, stay, she commanded softly, returning to the injured pair. Ethan gritted his teeth, sweat mingling with the cold rain on his forehead. With a tremendous effort that sent a visible tremor through his exhausted body, he used his good arm to brace himself against the pallet stack. Amy positioned the gurney beside him, hooking her arms beneath his and helping to guide his dead weight. The agony was clear in his silent, clenched expression. Kestrel whined, struggling to rise and follow. Not yet, Kestrel, Amy murmured, pushing the man onto the gurney. Guard the door. The dog, recognizing the tone of authority and necessity, lowered himself, keeping his fierce golden gaze fixed on the service entrance, refusing to break eye contact with the alley beyond. Amy pushed the gurney toward the warm, brightly lit entrance. The moment the gurney crossed the threshold, the wind seemed to change. The sound of a heavy engine, low and powerful, cut through the storm's natural noise. High-intensity headlights, bright white and cruel, swept across the mouth of the alley. It was a large, dark SUV moving slowly, prowling. They're here, Ethan hissed, his voice raw with sudden panic. Inside, now Amy didn't look back. She shoved the gurney with all her might. The wheels clattered loudly as they crossed the metal threshold. Kestrel now, she shouted. The dog, showing remarkable speed despite his injury, pushed off the ground, limping heavily but determinedly into the clinic, just as the SUV's lights swung toward the rear door. Amy slammed the heavy steel door shut, throwing the deadbolt with a resounding clack. She leaned her back against the solid metal, sucking in ragged breaths, listening to the heavy engine idle outside for 10 terrifying seconds that stretched into an eternity before the vehicle accelerated and disappeared into the snowy night. She was safe contained within her sanctuary, but her quiet life had just been violently shattered. She looked down at the blood-stained floor, at the unconscious man slumped on her gurney, and the exhausted German shepherd who was the only reason his handler was still alive. The triage had begun. The clinical hum of the examination room lights cast a harsh fluorescent glow over the scene, illuminating the metallic sheen of the stainless steel table and the dark stains of blood left on the concrete floor. The air, usually sterile and smelling faintly of lavender, calming spray, was now thick with the copper tang of blood and the earthy scent of wet fur. Amy Sterling worked with a speed and focus that belied the fact she was acting entirely alone, miles from professional backup in the middle of the night. The combat medic's precision had instantly overridden the veterinarian's cautious routine. She had managed to heave Ethan's heavy frame onto the large examination table, a piece of equipment usually reserved for livestock, while Kestrel, the gray and white German shepherd, lay shivering but cooperative on a thick orthopedic mat she had laid beneath the table. The dog's eyes, though heavy with pain, remained fixed on his handler, a silent vow of protection. Kestrel first, Amy murmured, snapping on a fresh pair of latex gloves, and quickly. She knelt by the dog's flank. The wound was jagged but manageable, a deep laceration from shrapnel or a glancing blow, thankfully missing the femoral artery. Working swiftly, she sheared away the thick wet fur, applied local anesthetic, and methodically cleaned the wound. She noted the dog's muscle structure, powerful, trained, resilient. "You're a good, brave boy, Kestrel," she whispered, tracing the dog's broad head. Kestrel acknowledged the touch with a soft, ragged sigh, seeming to understand the necessity of his temporary sedation and stillness. Within 10 minutes, the worst was over. The wound was stapled, dressed, and the dog was given a broad-spectrum antibiotic and pain medication. He was stable, breathing evenly, and still watching Ethan. Amy washed her hands, took a deep, steadying breath, and turned her attention to the man on the table. "Your turn, Ethan," she announced, her voice calm and authoritative. She cut away his tactical vest and the layers of soaked thermal clothing. As the fabric fell away, it revealed a torso mapped with scars, old burns, knife wounds, and pale, ragged ridges that spoke of a life lived in the deep shadows of conflict. Around his neck hung 2 heavy aluminum tags. The sight was a punch to Amy's chest, a sudden visceral connection to her past life. She located the entry wound on his left shoulder. It was deep bleeding. Persistently, the bullet clearly lodged near the clavicle. Amy prepped the syringe. "I need to put you under," she stated, professional and firm. "Ketamine propofol enough to knock you out completely. I have to go deep to retrieve this bullet. You cannot move." Ethan's eyes snapped open, blazing with an alertness that defied his pale skin and rapid breathing. His good arm shot out, gripping the edge of the stainless steel table until his knuckles turned white. "No," he hissed, the sound grating. "Local only. Lidocaine." "I have to stay awake." Amy stared at him aghast. "That is impossible. The bullet is lodged deep in the bone. The pain will be unbearable, and if you move an inch, I could easily nick the subclavian artery. You will bleed out in 30 seconds. If I go under," Ethan countered, his dark eyes locking onto hers with a terrifying clarity, "and they come back, we are all dead. I need to be able to access my pack, or at least be lucid enough to act. I need to be aware." He nodded toward the corner where Amy had placed his heavy sodden pack. The sheer dangerous force of his will silenced her argument. Arguing with him would only waste time and adrenaline they both desperately needed. "Fine," Amy clipped out, grabbing the vial of lidocaine. "But you fight every instinct to move. You focus on the dog. You focus on the mission. Do not, under any circumstance, lose consciousness on my table." The next hour was an exercise in controlled brutality. Amy injected the numbing agent, but knew it was only a psychological barrier against the deep, ragged ache of trauma. She selected long hemostats and a retractor from her small surgical kit, normally used for complex internal animal procedures. As she began to probe the wound, slicing carefully to gain access, Ethan threw his head back against the cold steel of the table, a low, desperate groan escaping his clenched teeth. His entire body went rigid. "Talk to me, Ethan," Amy ordered, trying to anchor him, her voice strained. "Tell me about Kestrel." "What's his designation?" Ethan panted, sharp, shallow breaths. "Kestrel, Shadow Tracker. Saved my life 3 times. Best partner." Amy worked with ruthless efficiency, her vision narrowing to the small, bloody field of operation. She located the metallic slug, jagged, wedged tight against the bone. Almost there. Just a little more pressure. She applied pressure to extract the bullet, and that was when his body gave out. The pain spiked, sending his traumatized system into free fall. The heart monitor Amy had instinctively attached to his chest let out a frantic, irregular beeping before flatlining into a singular, high-pitched tone. "No, no, no, no," Amy yelled, dropping the instrument. The bloody bullet clattered into a metal tray. Ethan's eyes rolled back, his head falling lifelessly to the side. Amy grabbed his jaw, checking for a clear airway, then slapped her hands onto the center of his broad, terrifyingly still chest. Panic later, triage now. She began compressions, hard, fast, deep. "Come on, Ethan, you don't get to die in a veterinary clinic." "Not now," she grunted with the effort. 30 compressions, 2 rescue breaths. His chest rose, but there was no spark, no resistance. "Come on," she screamed, resuming compressions. Tears blurred her vision, tears for the unfairness of it all, tears for the man on her table, and tears for the ghost of loss she carried from her past. Suddenly, a massive, unexpected movement erupted from beneath the table. Kestrel, fighting through the lingering sedative and the pain of his own injury, dragged his heavy frame out onto the tiles. He let out a sharp, piercing, sustained guttural growl, a sound of pure, raw defiance and command to his fallen handler. Kestrel reared up, resting his heavy front paws on the edge of the table. He nuzzled Ethan's limp hand, whining with a sound that tore at Amy's heart. As if hearing the call from a great distance, Ethan's body gave a violent, desperate jolt. He sucked in a massive, ragged breath, his back arching off the table. The monitor beeped once, twice, then settled into a fast, weak but steady rhythm. Amy collapsed back against the counter, sliding to the floor, shaking uncontrollably. She buried her face in her hands, her teeth chattering from a combination of cold fear and exhaustion. Above her, Ethan slowly turned his head. His eyes were half open, glazed, but he was seeing. His hand-twitched fingers brushing against Kestrel's coarse fur. The dog, having completed his mission, rested his head on the table beside his master's shoulder, closing his eyes in exhaustion. The connection, Amy whispered, staring at the dog, then at the man. It was a neurogenic response. The primal bond brought him back. Ethan turned his dark eyes toward her, now sharp with focus. The ledger, he rasped his voice, sounding like dry paper being crumpled. It's in the pack, encrypted. But the files, they show the details of the transfer. He took a deeper breath, the pain returning with a vengeance, but his determination was absolute. It wasn't a foreign asset that betrayed me. It was Latham, my security chief. He was on Sterling's payroll. He set up the rendezvous to look like an ambush, but it was an assassination attempt. Amy retrieved the bloody bullet from the tray and tossed it into a biohazard receptacle. Sterling, she repeated, her voice steadying. Victor Sterling, the biotech mogul. He's supposed to be a philanthropist. He is Ethan, confirmed, the irony chilling. But he's also a traitor. He's selling the Project Chimera technology, a bioweapon that targets specific genetic markers, to the highest bidder. I had the physical hard copy, the ledger, ready for extraction. Latham ambushed us on the extraction route. Kestrel took the first shooter. We took fire, but we managed to break contact and get away with the evidence. Latham told Sterling I was rogue. Now they think I'm dead or close to it. Ethan looked at the dog resting beside him. I'm not fighting just for my life, Amy. I'm fighting for Kestrel's right to live, and for the thousands of people that monster Sterling will kill with that tech. Amy stood up, the combat medic fully returned, pushing her own exhaustion aside. She looked at the man and the dog who had literally fought their way back from the dead together. Then we stop running, Amy declared, grabbing fresh gauze and sterilizing fluid. We stabilize, we move. We find a way to get your proof to the right people. But first, we heal. She knew she had just crossed a dangerous final line, trading her quiet sanctuary for a war she never wanted to fight. The cold, pale light of dawn struggled to penetrate the heavy snow blanketing the Montana wilderness. Inside Amy's clinic, the atmosphere was a pressurized blend of exhaustion and urgency. Ethan was stabilized, his shoulder heavily bandaged, but Amy knew the clinic was no longer safe. The predatory silence of the black SUV had been a promise of return. My grandfather's cabin, Amy said, looking at a topographical map spread over the counter. It's about 2 hours east, nestled deep in the Sapphire Mountains. No access except an unmaintained logging road, and the snow should cover our tracks. Ethan, propped up on the examination table, watched her with clinical detachment, assessing her plan. He was weak, but his mind was sharp, instantly calculating risk and trajectory. Elevation. About 6,000 feet. It's remote. Nobody knows about it but family. Good. That's what we need. Isolation. Ethan tried to move his left arm, wincing as the fresh stitches protested. We move in 30 minutes. Kestrel can walk, but he needs support. We drive your vehicle, the least conspicuous one. The transfer was agonizingly slow and meticulous. Amy moved the heavy-duty gurney to the ambulance bay, where her rugged all-wheel drive SUV was parked. Ethan, leaning heavily on her, was able to walk short distances, fueled by sheer willpower. Kestrel, limping but refusing to be carried, stayed glued to Ethan's side, emitting low-focused whines of protective concern. After securing Ethan in the back seat with Kestrel curled faithfully beside him, Amy gathered the necessities: a massive veterinary first aid kit, pain medication, high-calorie survival rations, and warm blankets. She included Ethan's heavy, rain-soaked pack, retrieving his encrypted ledger before stowing the bag beneath the passenger seat. The drive was slow, bumpy, and challenging, pushing the limits of Amy's vehicle through fresh snowdrifts. They did not speak, the silence filled only by the rhythmic hum of the tires and the soft, steady breathing of Kestrel. Upon arrival, the cabin was a picture of rustic sanctuary, weathered logs, a stone chimney, and a thick layer of untouched snow resting on the roof, blending perfectly with the towering pines. It smelled of old wood smoke and pine resin. It took another hour of careful effort to move Ethan inside and settle him on a worn leather sofa by the stone hearth. Kestrel collapsed onto the rug before the fireplace, finally allowing the exhaustion to claim him, though his head remained raised, constantly scanning the perimeter. "I need a secure line," Ethan stated once he was stable. "I need a way to reach the outside without leaving a digital trail that Sterling's people can follow. No cell phone, no GPS ping." Amy understood instantly. A burner phone, prepaid card cash only. North Bend is the closest town, about an hour round trip. "We need to go now before the snow gets worse." Ethan looked at her, his dark eyes radiating concern. "It's too much to ask. They saw your face outside the clinic. They saw a fleeting silhouette," Amy countered, pulling on her heavy snow gear. "I was wearing scrubs and a coat. In town, I'll be in ordinary local running errands. We can't wait. You need to contact Thad, and I need food that isn't meant for trauma patients." She saw the hesitation, the internal battle raging within the warrior who had been betrayed. He was used to protecting others, not relying on them. "I was an army medic," Ethan Amy said softly, meeting his gaze. "I know what it means to be the lifeline. I won't fail you. Now, give me the number." Ethan recited a long, complex sequence of numbers from memory, his lips barely moving. "Call this. Use my code name, Nomad. Tell them I have the package." Amy drove, but she was no longer just driving. She was calculating. She monitored her rearview mirror, the silence of the mountainous road amplified by the adrenaline coursing through her veins. She was operating in two modes, the calm, meticulous professional and the soldier on a mission. As she entered the sleepy, snow-dusted town of North Bend, the external threat became immediate and her internal struggle intensified. This wasn't a battlefield where the enemy wore uniforms. This was the quiet, mundane world she had sought, now corrupted by the same danger she had fled years ago. She parked the SUV in the crowded lot of a large retail center. She pulled her hat low and kept her hands deep in her pockets, moving with a controlled purpose. Inside the sprawling store, the fluorescent lights felt jarringly bright. She found the cheapest flip phone model in a prepaid card. At the checkout, the clerk, distracted and cheerful, barely glanced at her. Amy paid with crisp $20 bills and walked out. "You're clean. No lookbacks," she told herself. But as she rounded the corner of the store toward the parking lot, the instinctive prickle of awareness she hadn't felt since her last deployment suddenly flared across the back of her neck. She paused by a stack of propane tanks, pretending to tie her boot. Her eyes scanned the reflections in the store window. 30 feet away, near the customer service entrance, a man was loitering. He was nondescript brown jacket, jeans, average height, the kind of person you would forget instantly. But he wasn't looking at the sales flyers. He was looking at her. The familiar cold grip of fear tightened in her chest. But it wasn't the selfish fear for her own life. It was a fierce terror of failure. If she led them back, if she made a mistake in this simple civilian environment, Kestrel and Ethan would die. That thought was unacceptable. She could not fail this time. Amy swallowed the panic, forced her face into an expression of casual boredom, and started walking in the opposite direction from her SUV. If he followed her to her car, the license plate would trace back to the clinic and ultimately the cabin. She maintained a brisk pace, turning into a less busy side street. The man matched her pace, never closing the distance, but always present. He was skilled. Amy knew she couldn't outrun him. She had to outthink him. Up ahead was the brick facade of the North Bend Municipal Library, a public crowded space with multiple entry and exit points. She darted inside the heavy oak doors. The interior was quiet, smelling of old paper and dust. She walked quickly past the main desk, weaving through the tall fiction stacks. She heard the main doors open behind her, but refused to look back, relying entirely on her military training. She slipped into the children's section, then pushed hard through a side door clearly marked "Staff Only," betting that during the day the alarm was only set to a chime. She emerged into a narrow, wet alley, sprinting hard around the back of the building, using a garbage enclosure for cover. She circled the block using the dense traffic of the main street as a shield, returning to the parking lot from the opposite direction. Her pursuer was nowhere in sight. She was confident she had lost him, or at least bought enough time. Slipping into the SUV, she gripped the steering wheel until her knuckles were white. The return journey was a blur of paranoid scrutiny, but she drove meticulously, taking 3 unnecessary detours before merging onto the highway, ensuring she had a clean path home. When Amy returned to the cabin, Ethan was waiting on the sofa, Kestrel's head resting on his outstretched leg. The immediate tension in the room was palpable. Trouble. Ethan asked, his voice low and devoid of unnecessary inflection, instantly assessing her pale face and trembling hands as she handed him the small plastic bag. Someone was watching me. Amy confirmed, shedding her coat. Brown jacket. Professional. I lost him at the library. He didn't see the vehicle. A flash of respect, unbidden and brief, crossed Ethan's weary face. Good work, Amy. He tore open the package quickly, inserting the battery and SIM card with practiced, efficient movements. He dialed the complex sequence of numbers and put the phone on speaker, setting it down on the pine table between them. The line rang twice before a gravelly veteran voice answered. "Echo 4, Ethan said, using his call sign. There was a pregnant silence on the other end, thick with disbelief. "Nomad, is that you, Nomad? We got the official report, said you went dark. KIA rogue status." The voice, older and weathered, was Thaddeus "Thad" Holt, a former Master Chief Ethan's only true mentor. "The report is a lie." Chief Ethan stated, his voice steadying. "Latham betrayed me. Sterling's assets tried to terminate us. I have the package. I have the ledger. I need extraction. Quiet. Civilian involvement." Thad swore under his breath, a string of colorful, seasoned curses. "I knew it. I never believed that rogue garbage. Listen to me, Nomad. Sterling has eyes everywhere, including the Joint Command. I can't send a bird now. I've initiated a secure channel calling in favors with the marshals. I need 48 hours to set up a clean corridor." 48 hours is too long, Ethan countered, glancing at Kestrel, who whined softly in anticipation. "They're actively sweeping the area. They saw the doctor's clinic. They'll find the cabin in 24. "Then I'll cut it in half," Thad said, his voice dropping to a whisper of steel. "I'll bring a team by 0500 tomorrow. Don't move. Don't engage unless you have no choice. I'm coming early." The line went dead. Ethan stared at the phone. The sudden agonizing weight was now upon them. 0500 tomorrow, Amy repeated, looking out at the gathering twilight. "That's less than 17 hours. Ethan nodded grimly. "It's enough. Now we prepare for the night. They know we're close. They won't wait for dawn." The cabin air was thick with the scent of cedar smoke and antiseptic. The darkness outside, heavy and absolute, pressed against the small window panes. 17 hours until the extraction window, 17 hours of tense waiting that felt both impossibly long and desperately short. Amy had managed to turn the rustic living area into a functional sickbay. Ethan lay on the sofa, his shoulder rigid, and Kestrel was curled on the rug, heavily sedated, but still breathing steadily. Amy moved with the quiet competence of a caretaker, boiling water on the old wood stove for tea and checking the dressings on both patients. After administering the last of the strong painkillers, Amy sat on the hearth across from Ethan. The firelight danced, catching the deep, thoughtful shadows in her eyes. The silence stretched, a fragile thing that needed to be filled. "You know," Amy began, softly stirring her tea, "you never told me what you were before. Before Sterling. Before you were Nomad." Ethan's dark eyes were fixed on the dancing flames, the weariness around them temporarily masked by the warm light. He was the kind of man who looked more comfortable sleeping under the stars than under a roof rugged with a deep, almost melancholic charisma. A consultant, he murmured the word, tasting like ash. Security operations, extraction protection, before that military, special forces. He stopped there, letting the heavy implications settle. Amy nodded, unsurprised. I knew. The way you look at a window, it's not a view. It's an access point. She paused, tracing the rim of her mug. I was a medic, field hospital. Then a few years back, I transitioned to a mobile unit close to the front lines. That's how I ended up with the nightmares in the clinic. Nightmares, Ethan asked, his voice low, a request for a deeper truth. They aren't dramatic, she explained, a wry smile touching her lips. They're just quiet. The silence after the fighting stops. That's the worst. Trying to fix something you know you can't fully fix. I left in 2019, came here to fix broken wings and broken bones, things that could actually heal. Ethan looked at her, and for the first time, the steel in his gaze gave way to something vulnerable. I left in 2021. I was supposed to be done. I'd put in my papers, but then Sterling's operation came up. A friend pulled me in for one last mission to retrieve a weapon. Latham convinced me it was a clean job. He ran his hand, the uninjured one, over Kestrel's head. The dog sighed, leaning into the touch. Latham, Ethan continued, his voice hardening, was my right hand. We went through selection together. I've entrusted my life to him more times than I can count. When he pulled that rifle on Kestrel and me, it wasn't the bullet that hurt. It was the absolute crushing realization that there is no line that can't be crossed, no bond that can't be bought. He spoke with the quiet bitterness of a man whose faith in humanity had been shattered and had not yet been restored. And now Ethan confessed the words, almost swallowed by the fire's soft crackle. I have to rely on you. A complete stranger. A civilian who is risking everything. I'm wired to trust only the man next to me, and the man next to me just tried to kill me. Do you understand my problem? Amy put down her tea, meeting his gaze without flinching. This was the deep-seated issue of trust he needed to confront. I do, she affirmed. But let me explain the difference between a medic and a soldier. A soldier fights for the man next to him. A medic fights for the survival of the man next to her. My mission is survival. It requires trust, Ethan. Not blind faith, but a professional necessity. You let me save you in that alley. You put your life in my hands. That is a bond stronger than any protocol or paycheck. She reached out tentatively, placing her hand gently on the leather sofa near his good arm. You are not a machine. You grieve. You worry about Kestrel. That means you're still human. You're just wounded, and I'm not talking about the stitches. Her touch was soft, but her words were absolute. Ethan stared at her hand, at the clean contrast between her skin and the worn leather, before slowly shifting his gaze back to her eyes. He had spent years learning to shut off that kind of vulnerability, to use his rugged exterior as armor. Amy saw past the armor. He remained silent for a long moment, processing the confrontation. Finally, a weary acceptance washed over his features. I'm scared, he whispered the admission, a startling contrast to his previous rigid control. I'm scared of living like this, always waiting for the bullet. I'm scared of what they will do to you if they find out you helped me. Then we stop them, Amy said simply. We finish this together. Kestrel, sensing the intense emotional shift in the room, lifted his heavy head and rested it across Ethan's outstretched knee, providing a tangible, warm bridge between the two humans. The moment of shared intimacy was shattered by Kestrel's sudden instinctive reaction. The dog's head snapped up. His ears swiveled rigid and pointed toward the front of the cabin. The soft, rhythmic sound of his breath stopped. A low, continuous rumbling sound started deep in his chest, a sound that vibrated through the floorboards. Ethan's professional switch instantly flipped. The vulnerability vanished, replaced by the cold, tactical alertness of the hunted. What is it, boy? Ethan whispered, pushing himself to a semi-upright position despite the pain. Kestrel did not bark. He simply stared toward the front windows, the thick fur along his spine slowly rising in a jagged ridge of warning. Amy hurried to the window, pulling aside the heavy burlap curtain just enough to peer into the inky blackness. All she saw were the swaying outlines of the snow-laden pine trees. Nothing, she reported softly. "It's too dark." "It's not nothing," Ethan corrected, his voice tight. "Kestrel has an 8-mile range on his hearing, and his nose is better than any sensor array. He hears things we don't. He smells things we can't process." He grabbed the long-range binoculars he had stashed in his pack and, ignoring the pain, limped toward the front door, pulling his weapon, a heavy black semi-automatic pistol, from the storage box. Amy followed him onto the porch, pulling her coat around her. The air was colder now, smelling of frost and damp earth. Ethan raised the binoculars, scanning the tree line that separated their hidden gravel road from the main forest access point. He held the position absolutely still for what felt like an eternity. "Look," he ordered, handing the binoculars to Amy, pointing toward a small clearing about 30 yards to the north of their cabin. Amy trained the lenses on the area. The wind had sculpted the fresh snow into gentle drifts, but she saw it a series of distinct, unnatural impressions in the pristine powder. "Tracks," she whispered, zooming in. "Not boot prints, not tire tracks. Snowmobiles," Ethan finished grimly, taking the glasses back. "A team, maybe two. They aren't using vehicles that leave road signs. They've bypassed the main access road and come in through the forest. They're grid-searching the area." He lowered the binoculars, his face setting into the hard, dangerous lines of the warrior. The gentleman who had shared his scars minutes before was gone, replaced by the lethal operative. "They know we're in this sector," Ethan stated, confirming his greatest fear. "They haven't found the cabin yet, but they've established a perimeter." "The quiet is over, Amy. We fight tonight." Kestrel, still rigid, lowered his head, only slightly confirming his handler's assessment. He was ready to fight for his new, unexpected life. The quiet that followed Ethan's grim declaration felt suffocating, heavier than the layer of snow outside. The final hours of waiting were spent methodically preparing the cabin for a siege. Ethan, despite the restrictive bandage on his shoulder, moved with practiced efficiency, directing Amy to reinforce the heavy oak door with furniture and to black out the small windows with thick blankets. "They won't use the front door," Ethan muttered, checking the magazine of his pistol. "Too obvious. They'll try the rear kitchen window or the crawl space. They want surprise." He placed his sidearm on the coffee table within arm's reach and then presented Amy with a second, smaller pistol he had carried in his pack, a smooth, ergonomic handgun. "I need you to take this," he instructed, his gaze steady. "If they breach, I might be engaged. You are the last line of defense. Aim for center mass. Don't hesitate." Amy accepted the weight of the cold metal. Her hand trembled slightly, but her eyes held the resolute firmness of the combat medic. She had tended wounds caused by these weapons. Now she was prepared to inflict them. "I understand." As the clock ticked past midnight, the tension became a physical pressure in the room. Kestrel lay on the rug between them, his breathing shallow, his ears constantly swiveling. He was the most sensitive sensor array they possessed. The attack commenced not with a burst of violence, but with a sudden, absolute absence. The faint rhythmic ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner instantly died. The low, steady hum of the refrigerator ceased. The single utility lamp Ethan had deliberately left on near the porch winked out, plunging the cabin into profound, absolute darkness. "Power cut," Ethan hissed, already moving toward the back of the cabin. "They're here. Get down behind the sofa. Stay low. Wait for my command." Amy scrambled behind the heavy leather sofa, gripping the pistol, her heart hammering against her ribs. Kestrel was instantly on his feet, his wounded leg momentarily forgotten, a low, menacing growling sound vibrating from his chest. Then came the sound of splintering wood, sharp, violent, and loud from the kitchen area. The back door was kicked in with a thunderous impact that shook the floorboards. Out the back. Now Ethan ordered, his voice cutting through the noise. He laid down a pattern of suppressive fire toward the hallway, forcing the intruders, 3 figures clad in dark tactical gear, to scramble for cover. He wasn't retreating, he was changing the environment to his advantage. The forest was his ally. Amy moved instantly, grabbing Kestrel's tactical vest collar. "Come on, boy, we move." They burst out into the biting cold night. The rain had turned to sleet mixed with heavy snow, instantly soaking them to the bone. The forest loomed ahead, a dense, chaotic wall of towering pines and shadows. "Get to the high ground," Ethan yelled, pointing toward a rocky, snow-covered ridge about 50 yards up the slope. "Stay low, don't stop." Ethan didn't follow immediately. He crouched behind a stack of chopped firewood, providing cover, as Amy and Kestrel scrambled toward the tree line. When the first mercenary burst through the shattered door, Ethan fired twice. The man fell without a sound. Ethan turned and melted into the shadows of the trees, moving with silent predatory grace. His injured shoulder ignored his focus, absolute. Amy reached the cover of a massive fallen Douglas fir log, pulling Kestrel down beside her. Below them, powerful beams of light sliced through the darkness, sweeping the yard. The hunters had entered the woods. Ethan appeared silently beside her, pressing a finger to his lips. He signaled sharply toward the left flank, the silent, precise language of the field. 2 attackers were moving to circle them. He needed a distraction to break the enemy formation. Amy nodded understanding immediately. She spotted a heavy piece of deadfall wood nearby. Swallowing hard, she hurled the wood with all her strength toward a thicket on the far right. The sound of breaking branches was distinct in the quiet storm. "Contact right," a mercenary shouted below, and the flashlights and gunfire swung wildly toward the false noise. It was the opening Ethan needed. He rose from the fern undergrowth like a shadow, taking down the nearest attacker with a clean shot. But there was a third man, one they hadn't seen, moving silently up the left side to flank Ethan. Kestrel saw him before Amy or Ethan did. The German shepherd did not bark. He launched. Ignoring the stiffness in his healing leg and the searing pain in his flank, Kestrel propelled his 80-pound frame through the snow and hit the mercenary's chest with the force of a battering ram. The mercenary screamed, startled, and swung his rifle like a club. The heavy polymer stock slammed into Kestrel's injured side with a sickening, crushing impact. Kestrel let out a high-pitched, desperate yelp of pain that tore through Amy's heart. He collapsed into the mud and snow, but his selfless action bought Ethan the critical second he needed. Ethan spun and fired. The mercenary fell. Silence reclaimed the forest, heavy and oppressive. Ethan rushed to Kestrel, checking the dog quickly. Kestrel was breathing hard, whimpering softly, but he licked Ethan's hand, struggling to stand. "Good boy, Ethan," whispered his voice thick with emotion. "You did it, boy. You saved us." He reloaded his weapon, his eyes scanning the darkness. "Is that all?" Amy asked, trembling, her own small pistol held ready. Before Ethan could answer, a blinding floodlight from the direction of the cabin pinned them to the ground. A slow, mocking hand-clapping sound echoed through the pines. Stepping into the brutal white light was a figure entirely out of place, Victor Sterling. He was impeccably dressed in a pristine charcoal wool coat, his silver hair perfectly styled. He had the cold, dead eyes of a predator. Impressive nomad Sterling called out, his voice smooth and cultured. "Truly. You have dismantled my entire acquisition team with nothing but a cripple and a veterinarian." Sterling was not alone. 2 massive, heavily armed guards stood beside him, and the laser sight of one rifle was trained directly on Amy's chest. "But the game is over," Sterling continued, gloating. "Drop the weapon, Ethan, or the good doctor becomes a casualty of war." Ethan froze. He had one clear shot at Sterling, but he couldn't take out the guard aiming at Amy fast enough. The red dot danced over her heart. Amy looked at Ethan silently, begging him not to give up. Ethan looked down at Kestrel, curled and whimpering, then back at Amy's determined, terrified face. His decision was instantaneous. He wouldn't let them die. Slowly, deliberately, Ethan placed his heavy pistol on the wet ground and kicked it away into the snow. He raised his hands in surrender. "Smart choice," Sterling sneered. He gestured to his guard. "Fetch the evidence. Finish the dog." Sterling walked closer, pulling out a small, ornate pistol and aiming it directly at Ethan's head. "Goodbye, Ethan. You were a bad investment." It was the moment of absolute helplessness. Ethan closed his eyes, his final thought a desperate regret for failing to protect Amy and Kestrel. Victor Sterling stood over Ethan, the ornate pistol aimed squarely at his head. A victorious sneer twisted the mogul's face, illuminated cruelly by the blinding floodlight. Any last words, Nomad Sterling purred. "A shame. You were almost clever." Ethan closed his eyes, accepting the inevitable. His final moments were not spent regretting his mission, but regretting that he had failed to save Amy and Kestrel. He had tried to build a sanctuary, but the war had followed him home. Then, the world changed. It began not with a gunshot, but with a deep, resonant thrumming sound that seemed to vibrate up through the frozen earth. The sound grew instantly into a deafening roar that drowned out the wind and Sterling's voice. The pine branches above them began to whip violently as a powerful downdraft hit the clearing. A blinding, focused beam of light more powerful than Sterling's floodlight cut through the sky, pinning Sterling and his guards like insects. A voice, amplified and distorted by a loudspeaker, boomed from the heavens, shaking the very air around them. "This is United States Marshal Service. Drop your weapons and surrender immediately." A dark shape, the unmistakable silhouette of an MH-60 Blackhawk helicopter, hovered just above the tree line. Its side doors were open, and figures in full tactical gear rappelled down the ropes with terrifying professional speed. Sterling looked up, his arrogance vanishing in a flash of pure panic. He brought his pistol down from Ethan's head, wildly searching for an escape. Before he could react, a single sharp report of a rifle exploded from the darkness on the perimeter, distinct from the helicopter noise. Sterling screamed, clutching his wrist as his pistol flew from his hand and landed uselessly in the snow. Thaddeus "Thad" Holt, Master Chief, emerged from the shadow of a massive cedar smoking rifle, in hand, his face a mask of granite disapproval. "I told you 17 hours!" Nomad Thad yelled over the rotor wash, signaling his team to advance, "But I knew you wouldn't listen. So I decided to cut that time in half." The SEAL team swarmed the clearing. Sterling and his remaining 2 guards were on the ground, zip-tied and neutralized within seconds. A medic rushed immediately toward Ethan and Amy. Ethan ignored the chaos and the medic. He stumbled toward Amy, who was kneeling in the snow, her arms wrapped tightly around the whimpering, injured Kestrel. He dropped to his knees, pulling both of them into a fierce, relieved embrace. "I got you," he whispered into Amy's hair, his voice rough with emotion. "We're safe. You're both safe." Amy clung to him, the shock and exhaustion finally giving way to a flood of relief. Kestrel, despite his pain, managed to lick Ethan's cheek. The war was finally over. Epilogue. The new mission. The skies over western Montana in late spring were a canvas of clear, brilliant blue, a stark departure from the relentless storms of November. The air smelled of thawing earth and new pine growth. It had been 4 months since the nightmare in the woods. 4 months since the capture of Victor Sterling, whose network was dismantled, and the evidence Ethan provided led to sweeping indictments for treason and bioterrorism. Amy was working outside the cabin, tending a newly installed small garden plot. She wore worn denim and a comfortable sweater, her hands busy with the soil, a stark contrast to the sterile environment of her clinic, which she had temporarily closed. Ethan emerged from the cabin, smelling faintly of sawdust and varnish. He looked almost unrecognizable from the haunted man she had found bleeding in the alley. Gone was the rigid tension. His frame was relaxed, his dark eyes clear. He wore simple work boots and a flannel shirt, his body channeling its coiled strength into creation, not destruction. He had received his honorable discharge papers. They had offered him an executive protection role, a desk job, an official commendation. "Thad called this morning," Ethan said, leaning against the newly repaired porch railing. "They wanted confirmation on the final paperwork. I told them I declined the promotion." Amy paused, trowel in hand. And the next mission, Ethan smiled, a rare, genuine expression that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "I told them I had a previous engagement, permanent." He walked toward the edge of the property where a small stream flowed, now clear with snowmelt. I've had that discharge letter mentally filed for years. Amy Ethan confessed watching the sunlight shimmer on the water, Latham's betrayal and Sterling's cruelty. That was the end of a chapter I desperately wanted to close. But finding you and Kestrel, that was the catalyst. It made the decision easy. It gave me a new mission. Kestrel fully recovered, save for a subtle hitch in his gait trotted up the path. His gray and white coat was glossy, his movements fluid and strong. He was no longer a shadow tracker. He was simply Kestrel, the cherished dog. Ethan walked to the porch, holding 2 items he had been working on in secret. One was a heavy new beam of polished cedar he had replaced in the porch foundation. The other was a custom-made leather dog collar. "They say you can't build a future on a rotten foundation," Ethan said, gesturing to the new beam. The porch was rotting. I fixed it. He walked toward Kestrel and knelt his knees, crunching on the gravel. He gently unclipped the dog's old frayed tactical collar, the one Kestrel had worn in combat, and placed it aside. It was a symbolic laying down of arms. He fastened the new collar around Kestrel's neck. It was sturdy, rich brown leather, hand-tooled. Attached to it was a silver tag that caught the afternoon light. "I'm not good with words," Ethan admitted, his eyes fixed on Amy, who had stopped working. "I'm good with logistics, and logistically this team doesn't work without you." He turned the tag so Amy could read the inscription. Engraved clearly in the metal were 3 names linked together: Ethan Amy Kestrel. "This tag means he belongs to this pack." Ethan continued, his voice thick with emotion. He didn't stand up. He looked up at Amy from his kneeling position, his vulnerability exposed. "You pulled us out of the rain. You gave us a place to land. I don't want to go back to the shadows. I want this. I want us. Here, if you'll have us." Amy walked toward him, the sun framing her face. The look in her eyes was one of profound peace. She reached out, cupping his face, her thumb tracing the line of a faded scar near his jaw. "You're already home, Ethan Thorne," she whispered. He leaned into her touch, closing his eyes for a moment before pulling her close. They sat together on the newly repaired porch swing, its movement a slow, comforting creaking sound, a rhythm of domesticity. Kestrel lay across their feet, letting out a long, contented sigh, his eyes drifting shut. Together, the 3 of them watched the sun begin its slow descent behind the silhouette of the Cascades. There were no sirens, no gunfire, no black SUVs waiting in the dark, only the steady, synchronized beating of 3 hearts that had survived the storm to find the quiet, enduring warmth of the light. Ultimately, this story reminds us that true strength is found not in the battles we win, but in the choice to build a home with those who choose to stand by us, like Amy and Kestrel stood by Ethan. If this tale of loyalty, healing, and second chances resonated with your heart, please show your support by subscribing to our channel and letting us know what you thought in the comments below. For another story that warms the soul and offers a message of hope, please click on the newest video that has just appeared on your screen now.